Hello, everybody, and either welcome or welcome back to my podcast. As always, I like to remind everybody, if you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. So this episode is going to be a little different from what I normally do, but it's an idea I've been kicking around, and that is that I read a lot of books. And maybe I should start telling you guys about the books that I read. So this is what this is going to be. It's going to be a review on this particular book. The title of the book is called Bad Blood, Secrets and Lies in a Silicon Valley Startup. It's by John Carreyrou. He is an investigative reporter for the Wall Street Journal. And basically what this book covers is his reporting and kind of all the things he found out, because he broke the Theranos story. And this is his book version of his work for the Wall Street Journal. So it chronicles a lot of the things that were going on behind the scenes at Theranos that nobody really knew about until after the fact. And just to kind of back up, in case you don't know what Theranos, technically was at this point, they were a biotech startup in Silicon Valley, started by a woman named Elizabeth Holmes. And the idea was that the end game of it would be that there would be in-home blood testing devices that basically, instead of going to the doctor and having vials and vials of blood drawn, you would be able to do it in your home, or you could go to another place, like you could go to your doctor's office, or you could go to like a standalone third party, and they can do a finger prick, just off the top of your middle finger, like you would do to test your insulin. And you put it into this little cartridge, and then you put the cartridge into the machine, and then it can test for literally hundreds of different bloodborne diseases, cancers, anything like that. And the end game was to have in-home units, which obviously if this tech were to ever exist, which let me go ahead and just tell you right now, it never did. This tech never actually existed, not even as a working prototype. But if this were to ever exist, obviously this would be huge. It would change the way doctors and patients interact with each other. It would make it so much easier if you were a patient who had to have blood drawn for routine, say you're on chemo, you're on dialysis, you're on a new drug regimen. If you're somebody that needs to go in on a regular basis to get blood drawn to monitor it, this would make it way, way, way easier, because the idea was you take it, you put it in the cartridge, you stick the cartridge in the machine analyzes it, and then sends the results to you through an app and then to your doctor. So that way you guys can be on the same page, and it eliminates the amount of time that you have to spend in a doctor's office. So obviously it would be much easier for patients. It would be much easier for doctors, because then that frees up more time for them. So you can see where this would have been a major, 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 huge deal if it ever happened. But like I said, it never existed. And the whole reason I got fascinated by this story is I remember when he was reporting it for the Wall Street Journal, and even hearing about Theranos before that, biotech isn't really my area of expertise, but just the description of what this was supposed to do didn't sit well with me. It didn't make any sense to me. And I was always like, how did anybody kind of fall for this? Because obviously when you go to the doctor and they draw vials of blood, they're not doing it to be assholes. They're doing it because the lab says we need X amount of blood to run these tests that your doctors want to run. So if it was something where it could be done off of a finger prick, or even with any kind of less blood than what you have to do now, somebody like Quest or LabCorp or somebody would have already invested billions of dollars into actually developing this. So the fact that none of the big players ever even went down this road kind of set off bells in my head. But then once you start to realize exactly how crazy this was and how bad it was, you're just like, how in the world did anybody ever manage to pull this off? So that's why I wanted to read this book, because I wanted to know the story of how do you pull the wool over people's eyes and get as much money and as much acclaim as she did off of something that, even to me as a layperson, was no, this doesn't make any sense. This isn't possible. So the book is arranged into 24 chapters, and each chapter is kind of a standalone chapter, although they all obviously go together because it's all part of one story. But it chronicles what was going on behind the scenes in both Theranos as a company, what was going on in their lab, what was going on with both deals with Walgreens and with Safeway. Theranos had made deals with both of those, Safeway, the grocery store chain, and then obviously Walgreens, to have like in-store little like Theranos boutique clinics where people could go, kind of like the CVS Minute clinics, but where they can go and do the Theranos blood testing there as opposed to having the machine in their home. And just kind of going over, because he talked to so many people. I think at one point here, he said that he had sourced from 150 people for this story. So it goes pretty in depth, and some of the stories that are told are a bit hair-raising, a little bit scary. It's like, how in the world how did this get pulled off? And I mean, it's explained in the book, and how Theranos basically tried to kind of skirt around having to do the FDA process to get approved, which is a little frightening in and of itself, that there's technically a pathway that they could have done, but not really, but that they really tried to do. And the things that they did with the blood samples and the way they were actually tested, and just how incredibly, incredibly dangerous this whole situation was. Because it's biotech and obviously blood testing like this. It's not like launching an app or a phone or anything like that. You can't fake it till you make it. You can't fudge it through. Like, this is blood testing. This is stuff that doctors use to prescribe treatments to patients. Like, you really can't fuck this up. And if you do, you could seriously, seriously injure or kill somebody. So knowing that, and then reading some of the stories and about how cavalierly this was all handled, it's just like, oh my God, thank you to John Carreyrou for doing this reporting and actually kind of like stopping things right in the nick of time, because right when the Wall Street Journal pieces were starting to drop is when the Walgreens rollout was supposed to be happening. So as bad as it was, it could have been catastrophically worse if the Walgreens rollout had happened. So thanks for that. Another part of the book that is really, really interesting, and because this is, like I said, this is John Carreyrou's story. He's the one that pursued it for the Wall Street Journal. At some point in the book, you go from hearing like other people's accounts to him actually being part of the story and hearing kind of what he went through. And so it kind of turns into this interesting kind of read on how the sausage is made as far as high stakes investigative journalism is concerned. And Theranos really, really went out of their way to try to kill this story. Like, for obvious reasons, they were valued at billions and billions of dollars. At one point, Elizabeth Holmes was the youngest self-made billionaire in the world. And so there was a lot at stake here, and they did a lot of really scary, sketchy shit to both Carreyrou and his sources. And it's interesting to read it just on that level if you are somebody who's kind of nerdy about that kind of thing, and you like to know like how the story got made, like how did this happen, like what did you do, where did you go, who did you talk to. He does discuss that a lot in the later part of the book, once you start getting to the point where the Wall Street Journal articles start coming out. Overall, it's a really, really well-written book, which is what you would expect of a two-time Pulitzer winner. But I recommend this. I really enjoyed this book. And even if you're somebody who doesn't really know or anything about Theranos, it's an interesting read, because a takeaway that I got from this is that it wasn't the FDA that ended up taking down Theranos. It wasn't any government agency. It wasn't any of that. It was basically what happened, really, is two incidents. One, Theranos overreached and tried to get this actually deployed to active military personnel, which put them on the FDA's radar through a very, very funny, interesting story that encompasses a chapter of this book, where it's funny to look at it now to see how it went down, because it's basically one of those like inter-army kerfuffles where things get misconstrued and things get said wrong. But anyway, I'll leave that for you to read. And then also the 2014 Fortune cover story, which is what really brought Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos to national attention. Like, obviously she was a rock star in Silicon Valley, but it was after that that people started asking questions about Theranos' technology. People who have experience in biotech, people that know about blood testing, and one of those people kind of got in touch with a couple of the people that Carreyrou ended up talking to, found out that there was a there for this story, and basically passed it along to him because that person didn't have the resources that Carreyrou has at the Wall Street Journal to kind of track down this story. So ultimately, what saved us wasn't any kind of government intervention. It was concerned people and one determined investigative journalist. And that's what stopped what could have been a just massive, massive catastrophe. Like, I cannot even begin to think if this had been rolled out into Walgreens and people started using it and started either self-prescribing or having their doctors prescribe off of the basis of these blood tests, Like, it could have been, it could have really, like, people could have ended up dead. And at this point, actually, what's funny is it just came out, like, I think about a week and a half ago now, that just now, after all this time, Theranos is finally disbanding as a company. And which is wild to think of in and of itself, because they've been toast for ages. And obviously, Holmes is under criminal investigation. There's lawsuits. There's all of that. But at least this helped minimize what could have been. So it's an instructive lesson in the fact that although we like to make fun of the press a lot because a lot of what they do now is shit, they do serve a very important function when they do things like this. Like when you have somebody who gets a tip like this and is willing to go out and take the risk and do the legwork and get the information to get this story out to people so that people can be warned that, hey, this thing is bad. Don't do this thing. Like, investigative journalism is really important. And I really, that's one of the things about the First Amendment that I do like, is that it does have that freedom of the press so that you can do this kind of investigative journalism. Because if not for Carreyrou, I mean, when would we have found out any of this? Like, how many people would have had to been seriously injured or died to find out what he found out? So I do recommend this book. It is a really good read. And yeah, I think that about sums it up. If you did enjoy this, please let me know. And as always, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. Take care, and until next time.